with you.
Rucker says, where do rights come from? We give them to ourselves, Rucker.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
When you so-called individualists support openly collectivist policies like universal healthcare, interventionist foreign policy, etc., or even just supporting a state, which is a collective, over the rights of the individual, how can you say that you are an individualist? Would you say that anarchists who want a state or support states are anarchists? Where do you get the notion that the largest violator of rights on the planet protects our rights? Furthermore, where do you get the completely absurd notion that a literal violent mob that is protected legally defends you against a violent mob that is not protected legally? Why can't you defend yourself from that violent mob? Why can't you hire others to defend you from that violent mob?
So, in social context, how do you consider yourselves skeptics, yet when your beliefs are challenged by people like my associates and I, you don't do the research on our philosophical understanding and economic stance, and fall back on the same logic collectivists use to dismiss our criticisms without actually confronting our actual beliefs? In simple terms, why call yourselves skeptics when you can't even confront our arguments without strawmanning our position?
How is it that you pride your political philosophy on the advocation of individual freedom, yet you have barely read little, if any, of the political philosophy, of which comes from the liberal and individualist theorists that you so gladly associate yourselves with as if you were parasites?
You do realize that when you're describing individualist philosophy, you're actually explaining the textbook definition of utilitarianism, right? You know, the literal antithesis of individualism? Well, you don't know because you're confusing these two, which leads me to my second point. You clearly don't know the first thing about individualism or individualist philosophy, and you don't believe in it. And if you don't believe in it, then why do you hide behind it and throw out the names of philosophers whose writings you've never read in response to people explaining individualist principles to you? You clearly disagree, so why do you find individualism to be a desirable philosophy? Are you just trying to make the actual principled individualists look bad, or are you just so used to picking the low-hanging fruit that you're just now realizing that taking on anyone other than SJWs in the mainstream media is not something that you're prepared for?
How can liberalists possibly support individualism while also supporting institutions which, by their very existence, violate individualism? How do you hold such mutually exclusive and contradictory ideas, yet claim to be a logically consistent position? On your principles page on Liberalists.org, you state, groups may not have rights that violate the rights of individuals, given that the only rights that require enforcement are positive rights. A group, the liberalist state, must therefore violate the rights of individuals, such as property rights through taxation to pay for things like universal healthcare. How do you reconcile this clear contradiction of groups that have rights over the individual?
Give ourselves arbitrary rights with no foundation and will somehow stop others from arbitrarily violating them. Liberalism.
The mere concept of a right implies objectivism, and therefore the idea that rights are given and arbitrary is complete nonsense. This being the case, you must either believe that rights are objective and that collectivist organizations such as the state are therefore an inherent violation of individual freedom, or you must believe that rights don't exist, in which case you're not liberals. In fact, you'd be more at home with the Trotskyists or the neocons. So, how do you justify associating yourselves with liberals and individualists with such anti-liberal and anti-individualist ideas?
Why does something automatically become morally or ethically correct when the state does it, and why does something automatically become morally or ethically wrong when private organizations or individuals do it? I'm not kidding. Why do you object to private individuals or organizations doing things that you think the state should do? And in the case of things like roads, education, healthcare, utilities, or security/law enforcement, why would you want the state to monopolize that?
Why is it that you seek to embarrass both yourselves and your communities, as well as the concept of individual freedom in general, with weak and ultimately debunked arguments like the horseshoe theory? Screaming, right-wing SJWs! Unfortunately does not debunk collectivist philosophy.
Speaking as a religious person, do you not realize the tendency within yourselves, or people in general, to trade one god or idol for another, many of you call yourselves skeptics, and yet many of you aren't skeptical of the government's competence when it comes to providing positive rights, like healthcare or schooling, or even to protect negative rights, like the right to life, liberty, or property. Many within your community have gone off the deep end, clinging to their ideology or philosophy, or anything else as tightly as any religious fundamentalist. Steve Shives, for instance, worships whatever idols his SJW wife puts in front of him.
What is it that you have against the privatization of roads?
At what point is taxation not theft? Though even if we were to assume that the horseshoe theory is still accurate according to our current understanding of the political spectrum, wouldn't that go to show how useless the political spectrum really is? Especially when we consider the fact that the far right is every bit as collectivist as the left wing? Why don't we revise it? Anarcho-capitalism is considered to be a far-right position, and yet we have virtually nothing in common with National Socialists or the alt-right. It's no longer an issue of right versus left anymore. Now it's freedom versus tyranny.